This is DHG, doing my review for Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly. This rating might surprise you a little considering this is one of the legendary PlayStation 2 horror games, but my review would be average. I thought about bad, good, average, and I thought, considering that some of the conventions in this game just simply don't hold up in today's gaming landscape in terms of quality of life and all that stuff, it definitely lands firmly in average territory. I'll explain why, as most of that goes within the gameplay section. Graphics. Now, I'm playing on the PlayStation 2 emulator, the PCSX2, and I'm playing this in 4K, so the graphics held up really well. I can't really speak to the original version, but the amount of detail that they packed into this game for the PlayStation 2 version with the extremely limited amount of memory they had with that console is nothing short of amazing. I'll show a little bit of the cutscene here.
Mayu? The lost village.
Get into the gameplay.
Whose is this emulator? Who else is here?
Now, I did quite a bit of fooling around with my settings just so you take a look at the translucent textures such as the fog and the shadows and the contrast and all that stuff. And I think I found a pretty good balance with this. It looks good to me. The other settings were just way too clear. This isn't a game that's meant to look razor sharp, if you know what I mean. The original fog detail looks very intact here. Ignore my voice in the background, I didn't mute this video. But the texture detail, like, take a look at the boards and all that. I mean, this is PS2 era graphics. The textures are unchanged. And for them to be that good back in that day and look so good scaled up to a 4K resolution, some of these games just amaze me when I play them on the emulator. This, Mercenaries Playground of Destruction. There's another one, but it's not coming to mind at the moment. It looks very good graphically. You're not going to be disappointed with either version of the game. If you go with PlayStation 2, it was also on Xbox. It don't matter. It looks good. So graphics aren't a problem. Controls. Oh man. This game utilized 2D controls and 3D controls. The differences between the 2D controls are made for a fixed camera, how would you describe this? A fixed camera perspective, and you're wandering around in a certain spatial area. Whichever way you press the thumbstick is where it correlates to that 2D screen space, but in 3D it's just plain old tank controls. Each one has their advantages no matter which one you choose, but neither of them are good, so that's the catch right there. The controls are antiquated, which, considering this is an old survival horror game, that should come as no surprise to anyone. That was like the standard there. But let me get into one of the fights. Okay, we just picked up the camera obscura right there. Looks like there's no fights in this video. Here we go. Now keep in mind that since controls are a big issue, I had a very hard time getting used to the controls in this game for this very reason. All the character-based movements are done with the left thumbstick, it's been that way for 20 years now. Nothing new there. But when you switch to the camera mode and you have to start aiming, it reverses. All character-based movements are done with the right thumbstick, and the left thumbstick has been relegated to aiming. These abrupt changes take a lot of getting used to, and considering that I'm right-handed, like most people, trying to aim with the left thumbstick is something I haven't been able to do since Resident Evil 4. So it came as quite a pain in the ass. You mix that with how the combat is done in this game, where you have a split second like right there to capture a precise photo which will do a lot of damage, with the imprecise movements of moving around with the left thumbstick and trying to move your character with the right thumbstick. It just becomes a nightmare at some point until you get used to it, if you ever do. It took me about 8 hours to get used to it. So the controls overall, mixing the 2D movement style with the 3D movement style, I prefer 2D as bad as it was, especially when the camera shifts into a new fixed space. You try to reorient yourself, sometimes you can't. And if you reorient yourself too far, you go back into a previous fixed camera position and you're just all discombobulated. The 3D space, as in the tank controls, I couldn't do it. I mean, I was able to do it in Resident Evil 3, but that's because it's an over-the-shoulder camera, it wasn't fixed camera. But you pick what you can work with. I mean, the controls in this are severely antiquated, so that's definitely something to rip on it for. Gameplay. Oh, here's where it loses a lot of points. And there was a game recently, I'm not just going to rip on this game for this too, because there was a game recently I played called Tortured Souls. I didn't do a review on it because I didn't finish it, and it was for this reason. If you're like me, and you don't really play this every single day, like I recorded Fatal Frame 2 over the past 2 weeks or so, maybe longer than that because I've been having issues with physical sickness. But I didn't sit down and play it on one beat, and you kind of have to, because if you go back and you look at Resident Evil 2, with how they display what keys open what doors and all that stuff, they kind of give you a bread trail as to where you go. In this game, you're pretty much just left remembering the last thing you've seen, you know, what spirit may guide you somewhere, or now, this is where the gameplay runs into problems. Right here, this is a door that you can't get through, or a locked door. Normally, it's sometimes red, sometimes it's not. But there might be something in this room that you need to interact with, and you haven't played in a couple days. You might start up at the save point over here, you forget about what's in this room, you wander around, you start knocking on these doors, you can't figure out where to go. Then eventually you go over here, then they give you another sort of unclear breadcrumb trail to follow to what the next thing might be. These things are usually pretty ambiguous, so unless it's a clear indicator like you start getting near the end of a game, you might just be wandering around. I mean, it's almost mandatory to use a guide with these games. And as I was saying in reference to Tortured Souls, a game I never ended up completing, is because the things were so spaced out across the map with the world's structure, which I'm going to get into in a second here. There's multiple buildings you can get on this game. This isn't a linear game. This is a semi-open world, semi-linear game, kind of like the old Resident Evils. So you might need something from building A that is applied in building B, but then it has to go back to somewhere in building C, and unless you remember all these locations very precisely, you're going to end up getting lost. And in Tortured Souls, that cost the game to play through. I never ended up finishing it because I stopped caring. Every time I booted it up, I couldn't figure out where to go. And it's pretty much the same thing here. The Resident Evil 2 remake they saw these challenges and they made it a lot easier for the players to get from point A to point B to keep the narrative going without the player getting lost. And that's something that the Fatal Frame series should do. I haven't played the newest one, the Made in the Blackwater, which I understand is a remake anyway, but I'm going to see if they update the formula in that game. Hopefully they do, because this is one of the best survival horror games out there. So the gameplay is bad in terms of laying out the direction that the player should go. That's what it got at the average score. The sound was pretty good. You're going to notice playing through the game a lot of eerie music in the background. The sound, the camera shots, the ghost voices. Let's see if we can get one of my favorite ghosts in this screen here. Oh, where did I encounter her? I call her the broken neck bitch. No, it's not this one. It was earlier on in the game. Noob. That was the doll maker. Oh, here we go. Listen to the ambient music in the background. Stuck. Okay, didn't see her fall there. Yeah, it is. I think this is where that broken neck bitch falls down. Yep. Yeah, the sounds in the game, ranging from the ghosts to the little menu indicators that you hear there, they're all pretty good. I haven't heard some in the game that, stay still, reminded me of PT. But the sound works, the gameplay sounds at least. When it comes to the music, which is the next one I'm getting to here, music, the music was really good, really effective in this game. Especially the ambient music in the background. It doesn't really change that much in between the fights and just going from point A to point B, but it can kind of indicate you as to what's coming. They lay a bit of a predicate for what's coming up next. And I'm trying to think of some of the other, like Silent Hill. Silent Hill was always very good on ambient noises too, and this is right up there in competition with them. So the background music, especially the ambience, was very good, and you get some more classical music thrown in there too, mainly in the intro and the ending. It all works very well. So my next point, the story. The story was, let's just say disturbing at least, and the story was what made it one of my favorite horror games. I'm not going to get too far into it, watch the videos. But the story going through all the stuff that goes on in this place called All Gods Village, which the first Fatal Frame took this to, I would say, a different extent, but this one made it a lot more compelling story-wise. The first one was just horrific things one after one. But the story was definitely a big drawing point here. Stability and bugs. I did not notice a thing. I did notice some audio bugs. I don't know if that was because of the PCSX2 emulator or if it was actually in the PlayStation 2 version, but I don't recall hearing those issues when I played through this PlayStation 2 6 years ago, but that might be because I played through it 6 years ago. And my opinions. I think with significant overhauls to the way that this game is played, improvements on the map, leaving the player better breadcrumbs as to where to go, that this could be one of the best franchises in survival horror, competing right up there with Silent Hill. I mean, not Silent Hill, Resident Evil. It doesn't have the action aspect. I think the combat revolving around the camera obscura is much more involving than anything you see in any other survival horror, and it's very unique. It's unique to Fatal Frame. There's a lot going on for this series. I would just love to see it get some updates without taking too much away from the original formula. As you've seen, older games that go into the more modern conventions of gaming add things like the gigantic bouncing arrows and shit that tell you where to go. That's just obscene. But you could leave more subtle um, indicators as to where to go, and Fatal Frame can manage to do that. And it's got a lot going for them. That's my review of the game. Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly. One of my favorite horror games, but average.